Every 2 weeks, millions of Americans do the same depressing little ritual. They open their paycheck, stare at the number, and think, wait, that's it? They worked the overtime, took the extra shift, sat through the meetings, answered emails at night, hit their targets, got the raise, and somehow the money still feels smaller than it should. Federal tax, state tax, Social Security, Medicare, then sales tax when they spend it, property tax if they own a home. It feels like getting taxed for the privilege of trying. And then, in the middle of all that, they hear something that sounds completely insane. A billionaire got richer by another $500 million this year, and may have paid little to no income tax on the gain. That's the moment regular people either get angry or tune out. Because it sounds fake. It sounds like internet nonsense. It sounds like one of those phrases people throw around to sound smart. But here's the thing. It's real. And once you understand how it works, you stop seeing money the same way. Because the biggest tax advantage in America is not some secret offshore account. It's not a hidden vault. It's not even necessarily cheating. The real advantage is much simpler than that. The rich often don't live on income the way you do. They live on assets. And the tax code treats those two things very differently. If you make your money through a paycheck, the system sees you immediately. There is nowhere to hide. Your wages hit the front door of the tax code the second they exist. But if your wealth grows because the business you own becomes more valuable, or the stock you hold goes up, or your real estate appreciates, the tax code often doesn't treat that growth the same way. Not yet. Not until certain things happen. And that gap between getting richer and creating taxable income is where the whole game changes. That game has a name. Buy, borrow, die. And yeah, it sounds dark. Because it is. But it's also one of the clearest ways to understand how wealth actually moves through America. Let's make this real. Meet Ryan. He's 38, lives in Phoenix, works in medical sales, makes about $145,000 a year, which sounds great to almost everyone who hears it. His mortgage is $2,850. 2 car payments cost him another $1,170. Daycare is brutal. Insurance is up. Groceries are up. He saves some money, but every time he starts to feel ahead, some tax bill, repair, or random life expense shows up and knocks him right back down. He's not broke, exactly. He just always feels one level below where his income says he should be. And every April, he gets that same sour feeling in his stomach. He works for the money, and the money gets hit before it can even breathe. Now compare Ryan to someone with a very different financial life. Maybe not even a billionaire. Just a founder, investor, or wealthy executive who owns $25 million in company stock. That stock rises by $4 million this year. Economically, that person just got a lot richer. Their financial position changed dramatically. Their options expanded. They can walk into a bank and be treated like royalty. But did they create $4 million of taxable wage income? No, not necessarily. And that one detail is the crack in the entire system. Most people think money is money. It isn't. A dollar you earn and a dollar your assets gain are not treated the same. That's the first thing almost nobody explains properly. If Ryan earns another $50,000 through work, that is taxable income. Simple. Immediate. But if someone owns an asset that rises by $50,000, the gain usually isn't taxed just because it happened on paper. In many cases, it matters when the gain is realized, meaning when the asset is sold, not merely because it increased in value. That is an enormous difference. A worker gets taxed when money comes in. An owner often gets taxed when they decide to turn appreciation into a taxable event. That means ownership doesn't just build wealth. It builds flexibility. And the rich understand that better than almost anyone. The first step is buy or build, acquire assets, start a business, own stock, buy real estate, hold something that can become more valuable over time. This sounds boring because everyone says it, but most people still underestimate how important it is. Wealthy people are not just trying to make money. They are trying to own the thing that money flows through. That's the shift. A middle-class mindset says, how do I increase my paycheck? A wealth-building mindset says, how do I increase what I own? Because ownership changes the tax conversation before you even do anything fancy. If your salary goes up, taxes show up fast. If your stock portfolio rises, or your business becomes more valuable, or your property appreciates, you may be richer without creating the same immediate tax event. That doesn't mean taxes disappear forever. It means timing changes. And timing, in finance, is power. Here's a simple metaphor. If you live on wages, it's like getting paid in ice cubes. The second they arrive, part of them starts melting away. But if you live on assets, it's more like owning the freezer. The system interacts with you differently because you control the machine, not just the output. Now this is where regular people usually think, okay, fine, but eventually the rich have to sell, right? And when they sell, they pay tax. So how are they actually living these huge lifestyles without getting crushed by capital gains taxes? That brings us to the second step. Borrow. This is the part that makes the strategy feel almost unfair. Because borrowed money is generally not taxable income. It isn't money you earned. It's money you received with an obligation to pay back. So imagine you own $50 million worth of stock. You could sell some shares to fund your lifestyle, but the second you sell, you may trigger capital gains tax. Or you could do what wealthy people often prefer to do: keep the asset, pledge it as collateral, and borrow against it. And that is the trick. Instead of selling the goose, they borrow against the eggs. Think about how wild that is. Your stock goes up. You become wealthier. Instead of cashing out and creating a tax bill, you go to a bank and say, "This asset is worth a fortune. Lend me against it." The bank says yes because you have serious collateral. You get liquidity. You keep ownership. You may avoid triggering the capital gains tax that would have happened if you sold. Same life. Same spending power. Totally different tax result. That's why saying rich people should just sell assets and pay tax misses the point. The sophisticated ones often don't need to sell. They can monetize the value without realizing the gain the same way an ordinary worker realizes income. And notice how different that is from how most Americans borrow. A normal person borrows because they lack assets. A wealthy person often borrows because they have assets. That's a completely different universe. One form of debt is survival or lifestyle maintenance. The other is strategic liquidity. Ryan uses debt to get things he cannot yet afford in cash. A wealthy founder uses debt to avoid disturbing an asset position that keeps growing. Ryan's debt often drains his future income. The wealthy borrower's debt is often backed by assets that may continue compounding faster than the cost of the loan. That doesn't make every rich loan smart. It just means the logic is different. And this is the moment where a lot of viewers should pause, because it explains why high income can still feel financially fragile. If your whole life depends on what you earn this month, then your tax exposure is constant, your spending pressure is constant, and your margin for error is thinner than it looks. But if your life increasingly runs on assets, you start operating under a different set of rules. That's why two families with the same lifestyle can be living on completely different foundations. One family looks rich because they earn a lot and spend a lot. The other family is rich because they own things that rise in value and can support their life without being constantly sold. From the outside, they may look similar. Under the hood, one is running on gasoline and the other is running on a power grid. Now comes the darkest part of the strategy. The part that makes people lean back and say, hold on, that can't be real. Die. Yeah. The name is blunt because the mechanism is blunt. If a wealthy person holds appreciated assets until death, those assets can receive what's called a step-up in basis. In plain English, that means the original purchase price is adjusted to the market value at the date of death for the heir. So if someone bought stock for $1 million, and by the time they die it's worth $10 million, that $9 million of built-up gain may disappear for income tax purposes when the heirs inherit it. The heir's starting point becomes the new value, not the old one. That is the punchline almost nobody forgets once they hear it. Buy the asset. Let it grow. Borrow against it instead of selling. Then die holding it, and the old unrealized gain may never get taxed as income the way a worker's earnings do. Buy, borrow, die. And when people first hear that, they usually react in one of two ways. Either they say, wow, that's genius. Or they say, wow, that's broken. Honestly, both reactions make sense. Because from a normal American perspective, it feels upside down. You work harder, get taxed more visibly, and often watch a chunk disappear before your checking account even sees it. Meanwhile, someone whose wealth exploded through appreciating assets may not face that same immediate tax hit, can borrow against the growing fortune, and then potentially pass the asset on with a stepped-up basis. That's why the entire debate around taxation in America gets so emotional. It's not just about rates. It's about what the system recognizes as taxable life. Now, there are some caveats, and they matter. This is not saying rich people never pay taxes. They do. There are capital gains taxes. There can be estate taxes for very large estates. There are interest costs on borrowing. Markets can fall. Loans can become dangerous if collateral drops or spending gets out of control. This is not magic. But the big picture is still true. Ownership gives wealthy people timing options that workers do not have. And timing options are huge. That's what ordinary viewers miss when they think wealth is mostly about income. It isn't. Income matters, especially in the beginning. But income is often the fuel, not the machine. The machine is ownership. Ownership creates appreciation. Appreciation creates collateral. Collateral creates borrowing power. Borrowing power creates flexibility. And flexibility is what makes the tax code feel so different at the top. This is also why so many high earners feel strangely stuck. They assume crossing six figures means they've escaped the problem. But in a lot of cases, all they've done is moved into a higher pressure version of the same trap. Nicer house. More expensive cars. Better schools. Better vacations. Bigger everything. But still funded mostly through labor income. Still exposed. Still taxable. Still vulnerable if the paycheck stops. That's not real freedom. That's a nicer cage. And look, this is where people get themselves into trouble. They hear about strategies wealthy people use and think the lesson is to mimic the surface-level behavior. So they start borrowing against their home equity to fund lifestyle upgrades, or they obsess over tax gimmicks while they still barely own anything productive. That is completely backwards. The point of buy, borrow, die is not go find debt. The point is, understand what the system rewards. The system rewards owning appreciating assets much more than it rewards spending earned income. That is the lesson. So what does this mean for someone like Ryan? Or for the average American household trying to build actual wealth instead of just looking successful? First, stop confusing a high income with financial power. High income can improve your life. It can help you build wealth. But by itself, it does not change the rules. If your lifestyle rises as fast as your income, you stay dependent on wages, and dependence on wages keeps you in the most exposed part of the tax system. Second, start measuring progress by what you own, not just what you earn. retirement accounts, brokerage accounts, equity in a business, productive assets. These are not flashy. They do not impress people at dinner. But they are the beginning of moving from worker-only economics to owner economics. Third, be careful with debt. Rich people borrow from a position of strength. Most middle-class people borrow from a position of pressure. That difference matters. Borrowing against a rising asset that you can comfortably support is one thing. Borrowing to keep up appearances is a much more dangerous game. Fourth, stop treating consumption as the reward for every financial milestone. This one is huge. The reason so many people stay locked in the wage loop is that every raise gets instantly converted into a car payment, a bigger mortgage, a nicer vacation, better furniture, better clothes, better everything. They never give capital a chance to form. They interrupt compounding to decorate their life. And that's really what separates the wealthy from everyone trying to look wealthy. The truly wealthy do not just make more. They leave more alone. That sounds simple, but it's psychologically hard. Because spending gives you immediate identity. Assets give you delayed power. Spending gets noticed now. Ownership changes your life later. Most people choose now. That's why this topic is not just about taxes. It's about behavior, emotional control, the ability to look successful without sabotaging the process that creates actual freedom. Ryan's biggest problem is not that he doesn't make enough money. At $145,000, he has a real opportunity. His problem is that his financial life still behaves like a consumer's life, not an owner's life. His raises flow into fixed costs. His debt obligations eat flexibility. His taxes hit visible income. And because he doesn't yet own enough productive assets, he keeps trying to solve a structural problem with more effort, more work, more hustle, more pay. But at a certain point, more labor is just more fuel poured into the same system. The wealthy solve that by changing the source. Instead of asking, "How do I earn more this year?" they ask, "What can I own that grows even when I'm not working?" Instead of constantly converting wealth into lifestyle, they preserve the engine and find other ways to access liquidity. That is why this strategy feels like such a cheat code. Because it is not really about taxes. Taxes are just the visible symptom. The real advantage is ownership scale. And before somebody says, "Okay, but I'll never be a billionaire, so what's the point of learning this?" Here's the point. You do not need to use this strategy at full scale for the principle to change your life. You can start shifting from labor only to ownership gradually. You can build retirement accounts and taxable investments. You can focus on broad, productive assets instead of signaling wealth through consumption. You can avoid turning every pay raise into a permanent bill. You can stop chasing the appearance of success and start building the foundation of it. Because the middle class often spends like they're trying to prove they made it. The wealthy often hold assets like they're trying to make sure they stay there. That's a very different psychology. And once you understand that, a lot of modern money culture starts looking weird. The obsession with salaried bragging. The obsession with luxury signaling. The obsession with visible upgrades. None of those things necessarily mean a person is building actual leverage. They may just mean they are very good at converting labor into lifestyle before ownership has a chance to compound. That's why buy, borrow, die is such a useful phrase. Not because you need to copy it literally, but because it forces you to see the game board clearly. Workers are taxed on motion. Owners are rewarded for position. Workers are paid for effort. Owners benefit from appreciation. Workers often spend from income. Owners can sometimes spend from collateral. Once you see that, the old dream starts to look incomplete. Get a good job is not enough. Earn more money is not enough. The deeper goal is to turn labor into assets before labor becomes the only thing your life knows how to produce. That is how you slowly escape the feeling that your money is always running uphill. So no, buy, borrow, die is not a magic formula for ordinary people. It is not a reason to go leverage yourself into stupidity. But it is one of the clearest explanations of how the wealthy legally reduce friction between growing richer and paying tax right now. And once you understand that, the real lesson becomes obvious. The rich are not just taxed differently because they have better accountants. They are taxed differently because they live differently. Their money is structured differently. Their wealth is built on assets, not just earnings. Their financial lives are designed to avoid unnecessary realization, preserve ownership, and transfer value efficiently. That is the game. And for the rest of us, the takeaway is not envy. It's strategy. Earn, yes. You need income to get started. But do not stop there. Turn income into assets. Protect those assets. Give them time. Stop interrupting compounding to finance an identity. Build something that can grow without asking your body and your calendar for permission every single day. Because if your whole life runs on earned income, you will keep feeling like the system takes a bite out of every step forward. But when your life starts running, even partially, on what you own, the rules begin to change. That is the real meaning of buy, borrow, die. Not become a billionaire. Just this. If you spend your life becoming an owner, even slowly, money starts treating you differently.